you can't always rely on what the bins are most full of at the fly shop, what most flies look like. You got to get in the fish's head a little bit and say, what is the fish seeing, and how can I most accurately imitate that? And of course, fish see differently than us. They see colors different. So I think that we're a little bit lost when we say, okay, I've got to perfectly match this olive hue to this blue-winged olive, or else, it's not going to work. And that's probably not the most important thing.
That was Mike Mercer telling us how he gets into the fish's head while designing flies. We're headed back to Cali today and the lower Sac. This is the Wet Fly Swing Fly Fishing Show.
Welcome to the Wet Fly Swing Fly Fishing Show, where you discover tips, tricks, and tools from the leading names in fly fishing today. We'll help you on your fly fishing journey with classic stories covering steelhead fishing, fly tying, and much more.
How's it going, everyone? Thanks for stopping by the Fly Fishing Show. Please head over to your podcast app and click subscribe so others can find the show and you don't miss the next episode. And if you can share a link with one other person, that would be super amazing. Head over to wetflyswing.com/subscribe to make sure you don't miss any upcoming episodes. And today, I talk with Mike Mercer, one of the main guys behind the Redding Fly Shop, the lower Sacramento, and Northern California fly fishing. Mike breaks down a step-by-step plan on how you can catch fish on the lower Sac, his amazing strategy to pare down flies while tying them to their essence, and how he makes his indicator rig. We get into talk about a cool perspective from a guy who has been working in the fly shop for over 40 years and has no plans of leaving anytime soon. Don't miss this as Mike shares the exact process that he used to develop the missing link, one of the most productive flies on the planet. This episode is sponsored by Deli Fresh Design, an all-American creator of fine, sustainable fly fishing gear. Stay tuned later in the show to hear how Ross does his part with DLD to reduce waste and impacts as he builds great equipment in a sustainable fashion. You can find Fresh Equipment Designs on Instagram at Deli Fresh Design, and you can get 20% off your next order using the coupon code WFS20 at delifreshdesign.com. So, without further ado, here's Mike Mercer from theflyshop.com. How's it going, Mike?
Going well. Thanks, Dave. Appreciate you having me.
Yeah, thanks for coming on. We've got a bunch of topics to dig into here. You've been, around. It seems like all over the country, the world, fishing for different species, and you're working for what I think is maybe, I'm not sure if it's the biggest fly shop in the country, but it seems like it's out there a lot. But yeah, I wanted to get into all of that. But before we do, maybe we can just talk about how you first got into fly fishing and how you got to where you are now.
Absolutely, yeah. When I was a kid, I was like 5 years old. My father actually worked in the bee business for a while, and so we grew up in Chico, California, Northern California. And so my mom and my sister and I would actually go up to a Hat Creek, which is a well-known local stream, and we would tent camp for about 2 months to 3 months at a time, so that we could meet my father as he drove bees from Nevada back to California and went back and forth. And so we could see him. Otherwise, we wouldn't see him for a long period of time. So we just camped. And part of that was, I'm a 5-year-old kid. What do? I'm fascinated with water. And so I would go down. My mom got me this little Snoopy rod, and I'd go down and start fishing. And it was fun because I was just little, and the guys that stocked the stream, the Hat Creek back there, they get, after weeks, they got to know me. They'd see this little kid down there, and they say, "Here, come here, kid, come here." And they'd push all the other people away, and they'd stock the fish in this little hole right in front of me and say, "Okay, cast." And so I'd hook the fish, and then I didn't know really how to fish, so I'd hook him, and then I'd just turn around and run back to the tent site. So dragging this trout for about 30 yards back to the where my mom would have to take care of him from there. Yeah. So anyway, but it instilled a great wonder of water, because I'd catch salamanders and bugs, and just typical inquisitive kid, right? So I really, even at that young age, developed a real love for water and the things that lived inside of it. And so from there, moved back to Chico. My dad got into ranching, and so I would just fish anywhere I could. And usually that was just like irrigation ditches or anything. Sometimes they didn't even have fish, but I was just compelled to fish. And as I got a little older, then around 12 years old, I took a YMCA class, and a guy who was leading it was a guy who's still a very dear friend of mine, John Andrews, lives in Idaho now, and he loved to fly fish. So he took us on camping trips and brought us fly fishing, and so I kind of made that jump at about 12 years old from spin fishing to fly fishing, and a lot of that was around Chico. So a lot of my early fishing was small stream fishing for trout, and I think that's a great way to learn. You learn a lot about stream craft and how to read water, where the trout are, how to not to catch them, how to spook fish, make all the mistakes. And that really surprisingly tends to relate pretty well to the larger rivers too. You just look for small streams and big streams. And so that's how I grew up. And when I was a teenager, I started a little place called Mike Mercer's Rod and Fly Shop, and I built rods and type flies, and just my parents' basement of all things. So these big businessmen would walk down the stairs to the basement, and there's this kid making flies and rods, and buy rods and flies from me. And I had some magazines, and anyway, eventually there's more to the story. But when I was 18, I was going to junior college, and I came up to Fish Hat Creek again. And on the way, I'd heard that there was a fly shop. And this is 1978. No one ever knew what a fly shop was, but I did. And I stopped in. They just opened their doors and started talking to the guys, and the two owners at that point, and Mike Mitchell and Brad Jackson. And before I left, one of the guys, Mike, said, "Hey, kid, you want a job?" And so basically I said, of course. And so I quit college and went to work at the Reading Fly Shop when I was 18. They just opened up in 1978. So still here 41 years later. And
wow.
It's been a great lodge. It is the biggest fly shop in the world. And it's been really, really cool to walk through the different generations of the shop and see the different iterations of how we've grown and the successes we've had, the failures we've endured, and just the various parts of the business. But that's probably the shortest version I can give you.
That's cool. No, that gives us a good summary. What did your parents think of you jumping out of college and going into the fly shop?
They were actually, that's a great question. They were actually all for it. They knew how much I loved to fish, and I was going to school to be a wildlife biologist, figuring I could get plenty of, stream time anyway, just working. And that was kind of a time of affirmative action. And I was probably the wrong gender. And at that time, I probably wasn't going to get a job, at least not what I wanted. And so I think they knew, it's like, this kid, he just lives to fish. I think this is probably a good thing. So they actually, to their credit, had no problem with it.
That's cool. And so this is pretty cool. I love the basement in your parents' house too. Could you take me to, so I've just pictured this. You're dropping down into the basement, down the stairs, kind of coming. Are you coming through the house, or are you kind of coming through an outside door?
Actually, at that point, it was through an outside door, and
cool.
It was my bedroom. So people had to actually come into my bedroom, and in my bedroom there was 2 rooms, and one was my bedroom, but I also sold flies and magazines in that room. And then there was another little part of my bedroom which I didn't utilize, and that was my rod making room. That's where I built rods, both fly rods and spinning rods. And so, these people would come down and just come down into the basement. It's my bed, but they seemed to like it. I mean, back then it was different, right? There wasn't a lot of the same stuff we have now today. There wasn't a lot of fly fishing stuff around. It was just piecemeal. And so even though, before I came to work at Fly Shop, I also, when I was a kid, worked for Walton and Erlene Powell for a while, not making rods or anything, but just working their shop a little bit. And so that was kind of, for me, it was kind of a big deal. But that was the only thing at that point really in Chico that there was fly fishing. And so as small of niches I had, there wasn't that much market. And so people got to know who I was, and they'd come, and I'd tie special flies for them. And, if they wanted, sometimes if you guys wanted a spinning rod to fish for striped bass in the Sacremento, so I could do that, make Fenwicks and stuff like that. And and so sometimes I'd make, guys want fly rods, I'd actually use some of the same blanks that Walton Powell did on his fiberglass rods. I just buy them from him and then make the rod.
Oh, wow.
And so,
this is the Powell.
Pretty funny.
This is the Powell from the rod manufacturer.
Yeah, Walton Powell, exactly.
Yep.
Walton Powell, exactly.
Cool. Okay. And yeah, so back in that time, the 78, when, you got into that first fly shop. So yeah, I guess overall in the country, there wasn't a lot of fly shops, but what was, what before that in Chico or around there, what were the shops? Was it kind of tackle shop sort of thing?
Yeah, there was, Walton Powell shop, of course, they were rod building, but they sold a little bit of flies and stuff like that. Walton's wife, Earlene, actually kind of took me under her wing early on and really kind of dressed up my fly tying, got me a lot better than I had been. And so that was a real blessing. And so that was cool. I also worked for a little a bait and tackle shop where I also did fly fishing stuff called Journey's End. And to speak to what you just alluded to is that, yeah, that was kind of the style. If people wanted to fly fish, they had to kind of just search for it here and there. And so in Chico, there wasn't much else. That, Journey's End Tackling Guide, the people came there and they'd buy flies, and they had fly rods a little bit there as well as bait and tackle and everything else. And so making mostly fly rods and flies, I kind of had a viable little niche at that point. And when I came to work here, there was a couple other shops in the Bay Area, but they were brand new for the most part, and just like we were. And so there really wasn't. It was kind of the beginning of an era.
Gotcha. And now the fly shop, which you worked for a number of years, is, as you mentioned, it's grown as to one of the. And what is the largest fly shop? What does that mean? Just, I guess you guys do a lot of online sales, but you also have I'm sure a large shop there. What does that entail when you say the largest shop? Because we do a lot of things. For example, from strictly a fly fishing standpoint, just a real fly shop, we sell more flies than anybody, and we've got we've got a ton of tackle. We've got a crazy amount of flies. You walk in the shop, it's like, oh my gosh, and you'd only see a part of it. We got so much backstock and stuff. So just for the name, we sell millions in flies, and so it's just for that stuff. But we also sell a lot of other gear. But a lot of shops sell a lot of gear. We're not probably bigger than anybody else in that respect. Gotcha.
But we also have, what I work in the travel department. And so we have a whole department of, 7 or 8 people that just work sending people to international trips around the world and to fly fishing lodges around the world. We also, because we're a destination here in Redding with tons of great fishing around, we also have a large guide service. Last I checked, we did actually have the largest fly fishing guide service anywhere. And that's due in large part because we have year-round fishing, very, really, moderate climate. So we've got rivers like the lower Sacremento in town that fishes well virtually 365 days a year. If you look at some of the guide services in the Rocky Mountains, they do more in a short amount of time because they have a short season.
Right.
If they work year-round, they'd have more than we do. But because we have this year-round season, it's been really nice.
Gotcha.
And one of the reasons we actually exist here in California was that when one of the original owners, Mike Mercer, decided he was going to start a fly shop, he wanted to go someplace where it wouldn't just be selling gear. It would be, have a good place to have great guide fish, good, fishing so anyway, and we also have a private waters program. We have a lot of leased private waters. We lease water around that's never been public before. It's just, always been private. So we have leased so people could go and fish places that, on their own, which that's always a popular thing.
Huh.
And then, of course, our retail shop, which we sell a lot of gear both online and as walk-in. So
gotcha. Okay, cool. Yeah, so you guys basically have it all covered, and you have the good the website name, the URL, the fly shop. That's definitely a good one to have.
Yeah, I think. Yeah, I think that Mike Mercer, the owner, he's still the sole owner now, but that was a kind of a stroke of genius way back. It's like, this. Nobody took the fly shops. I'm going to take it. So, and so, it's been kind of a fun thing.
That's cool. So, I was going to dig into, you've obviously traveled around and fished a lot around the world. I was kind of thinking initially maybe digging into some of the remote, Alaska stuff, but it sounds like maybe, talking about Redding and what you guys have down there, that's always kind of a funny thing when you say a destination, because, a destination could be in your backyard, right? It's all depends on who the person is. But what would you say when you think of, Redding and your area, what is the biggest destination spot down there where you might take somebody?
No question. It's the lower Sacramento, which flows right through the town of Redding and then goes south from here. So, we've got a lot of tremendous mountain trout streams, and I love them all. But if you look at our guidebooks, where do we get the most guide service work? Probably 80% of it goes to Lower Sac. And the reasons are basically it's a bigger river. It's very drift boat friendly. It's full of beautiful big wild rainbows that, mostly are 15 to 23, 24 inches. They're big, heavy bodied birds, just gorgeous rainbows. And the reason that they're here and the reason why this fishery is so good is more of a more recent kind of a thing. It's back when we first started the shop in the 70s, the Lower Sacramento no one fished it. It was a big river and it looked good and everything. We had some pretty big caddis hatches, but there just didn't seem to be a lot of rainbows. The fish that were here were nice, but you'd fish for a long time and not catch very many fish. And we didn't really know what was going on at that time, but we had so many world-class rivers like Fall River and Hack Creek and McLeod that we just didn't think about it much. It's like, yeah, it's the Sacramento, but it's not very good. And so we just focused on all our other world-class fisheries. And then things started to happen, and we noticed. And one thing that happened was that there was a pulp mill south of us here, and it turns out they were pumping dioxin in the river. And somebody, some watchdog group, I think, found out about it. So they shut that down. So there's no more dioxin in the river. And then up above, more recently, most of our really great trout streams in the mountains flow into Shasta Lake. And then from Shasta Lake, it kind of coalesces into the Lower Sacramento. And so just below Shasta Dam, there was a giant influx from an old copper mine. And so for a while, it was the number one superfund site in the country. It's just this copper, nasty stuff. Water comes in orange.
Jeez.
And so they cleaned that up, and it was a long, ongoing thing, still going. But what we found is that when they started doing all these water improvement qualities, suddenly we didn't just have caddis anymore. Suddenly we started seeing a resurgence of mayflies, PMDs, green drakes, betas, a lot of different species that all the mountain streams have, but we never had in the Lower Sacramento. And then we'd start seeing different caddis species. And finally, the thing that really showed us what was going on was we started to see a resurgence of salmon flies and golden stones, little yellow stones, because they're kind of the canary in a coal mine, right? They have to have very clear water to be able to clean water to survive. So when we started seeing stoneflies, it's like, okay, something's really changed. And then at more or less the same time as our salmon runs were depleted terribly here up in the upper part of Sacramento, they put in a cold water device on Shasta Dam. And so they could move this device up and down hundreds of feet again on the dam, so they could choose what temperature water they would put into the Lower Sac. And so suddenly we've got like 56 degrees year round. And they did that for the salmon, and such as it is, it did help. It's a whole nother can of worms there, but it did help. But secondarily, it made a huge impact on the trout fishing. So now we had clean water, a bunch of insect species, which got even better when the cold water became regulated. And then we noticed that instead of a few bigger trout, suddenly we've got tons of big trout. And so it's a real success story where we didn't realize how badly it was polluted because you couldn't see it. But when they made all these changes, suddenly we've got a true world-class trout fishery with lots of big fish and lots of insects, lots of hatches, and lots of great nymphing. And while it's never been known as a hatching, a dry fly stream, it's becoming more and more popular just for that. It's still predominantly nymph fishing, but I noticed over the last 5 years or so, we've had more and more predictable, great dry fly fishing, primarily with mayflies. Gotcha. The caddis with the improved water quality have actually regressed to more of a normal niche because they dominated before. They're the only thing that could survive. And now the mayflies have gotten stronger. There's more stones, but it's become equally productive as a mayfly stream with all the different species. And so it's just really good from a fly fishing standpoint. That's a good thing, right? Yeah. And so it's remarkable. So all that to say that we've got a stream here that, from a guide standpoint, we use 100% guide, drift boats to access, and we fish dries and nymphs.
What
very comfortable, easy way.
What kind of drift boats do you guys run down there?
all mostly 16-foot, 17-foot drift boats, all different. Yeah, each guide has his own favorite.
Okay.
So,
yeah.
But yeah, just standard.
Is there a
double ender drift boats?
This is a little bit of a side note, but is there a boat? I'm kind of thinking about getting into a little bit of a drift boat series. But are there any drift boat manufacturers or companies down there in that California?
There's some in Oregon.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, there's Hyde drift boats, and there's a couple. It's kind of, Oregon's got a little bit of a hotbed, I think, for drift boats.
Yeah, and
there's several manufacturers up there.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
I'm in Oregon, so yeah, we have a bunch of drift boats, and I've got a good history on the boats. But cool, yeah. So you guys run the drift boats, and
we do. Although we mentioned briefly before we got on the line here, Dave, about DIY fishing, and the Sacramento, it has this reputation as like, well, it's a big river, so you have to have a drift boat to fish it. But I'm living proof that's not the case. I personally prefer to wade it. And so what happens is you just have to know all the access points that are good for wading. And there's quite a few. You just have to figure them out. But basically between Redding and Anderson, which is about 8 miles via the highway, a little longer via the water, but there's numbers of good walk-in access. Now, it's a big river. You're not going to be able to fish it, shore to shore, anything like that at all. But there's a lot of great water that can be accessed via wading. So I always tell people, you don't have to have a guide to fish this river. You just have to learn the good access. And the flows change during the winter. Generally, the flows are quite low because there's no need for agricultural demands downstream. And so they drop the flows way down and fill the lake, get ready for the next season. In the spring, they start to raise the flows as agricultural demand comes up. In the summer, it's full on. They're pumping a lot of water down for agriculture. And then as it goes in the fall and winter, it drops again. So even in the high flows, though, there's some good wade fishing, although it's probably 20% of what you have in the winter when it's very low. And of course, it's legal to fish here all year round. So it's a great destination in the winter, fall, winter, early spring, when maybe other streams aren't open. And again, the quality of fish is remarkable. The rainbows here are just beautiful. So
that's great. Yeah, that's the story. Yeah, that's definitely a great success story. And I think, I think the Sacramento, I'm not quite sure, but I think maybe historically it had some of the largest Chinook runs. I'm not even sure, maybe the largest fish, just size of Chinook, right? Even bigger than the Columbia back in the day. But that seems to be the case that the salmon maybe will take a little bit longer, on the recovery, where rainbows are hitting their little niches and migrating around within the river. But did you see this change? You've seen it. How long have you been working at the fly shop?
41 years now.
Yeah, 41 years. Wow, that's amazing. So you've seen it. You've seen this change over the time, and how would you say, in the last 5 or 10 years, is it just keep getting better and better, or do you see some leveling off of the rainbow fishing?
The rainbow fishing, I've seen both. I think overall, it's by far the healthiest it's ever been. I remember back in the early 90s, we had a couple of years where we caught a lot of big fish, a lot of 24, 25, 26, 28, even some pushing 30-inch fish. But it was odd. I still don't know exactly what it was, something that wasn't obvious. And then it dropped back down to normal, where our normal fish here are 15 to 20 inches. That's a normal fish. And we've never seen that big of a push of giant fish before or since. So there's weird things like that, but overall it's plateaued, where we catch lots of fish year round. They're really big, beautiful fish. We see little oscillations depending on weather and stuff like that. Generally, because they control the flows, it's very predictable. But I would say that as far as numbers and stuff, one thing that happened or has continued to happen that really worried us, and it's kind of a serendipitous thing how this timing worked out, but we were very concerned because over the last 34 years, we've noticed a precipitous decline in the number of kings returning. And in the more recent years, in the last 5 or 8 years, it's gotten very bad. The point, when I first started working here, you could go out and just look out at the river and just see hundreds of spawning salmon everywhere. Just everywhere. And now I can go out and I can go for weeks on end without seeing a salmon. Right. So it's been very dramatic, and we were concerned. It's like we knew the fish ate tons and tons of eggs. The trout ate tons and tons of eggs in September, October, November, and we're thinking, man, these salmon are there. We're number one concerned for the salmon, and secondarily concerned what's that going to do to our trout fishery? Right. Well, as I said, serendipitously, we had these improved water conditions and thus improved insect biomass that happen at the same time, and our fish are probably, well, not probably, they are healthier than they were back when they had the salmon runs.
Oh, yeah.
Because filling in for the eggs has been all this massive amount of new insects, and so they're fatter and bigger and healthier than we've ever seen them. That is cool. It's not good news for the salmon. No. I mean, it has nothing to do with that. But from a trout fishery, we breathe a huge sigh of relief. It's like, oh, thank goodness, because we were really concerned. I mean, because we knew that they depended on those eggs, and now they don't have to. They eat them when the salmon are here, but it's just not as big a deal anymore.
Gotcha. So. Okay. Yeah, I was hoping we can get into, I think this is a pretty cool line to go down as far as the Sacramento, and maybe thinking of a DIY sort of deal. I mean, if you had, maybe you can just talk about how you get into fish, on the Sacramento and how you do it, and then maybe we can get into a little some tips for maybe somebody who hasn't been there before, and how we could help them get into some fish. Could you maybe start off just with how you the typical way you get into some of those fish there?
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's and again, I wade fish it year round, but I do the vast majority of my fishing here in the winter. Starting in usually around October, November, and then fishing through March, April, that sort of thing. It's because the water flows are low, and it opens up a tremendous amount of shallow riffles, which hold a lot of insects, holds a lot of trout because of that. And so, if a person comes into the shop, we have maps we can give, they're free, and we'll show you access points up here in the Redding area. And the Redding area has the most from here down to Anderson. There's miles of rivers, but up in Redding, there's a very concentrated amount of wading water, just because it's still kind of the tip of the valley. It's close to the mountains, and so the drop is still a little more noticeable. So we have more riffle drops, and so there's just more good wadable water and where we can access fish. And so a guy can come in, get a map, point them where to go, and if they want to just kind of look around their own and investigate, they can find even more. But the key is to find public water where you can wade in, where there's riffles, so you can wade and actively access the fish. If it's a big wide pool or run, it gets a big river. It's running 20,000 or so right now, CFS. Oh, wow. So if there's a place where there's no riffles or to delineate where you're going to find fish where you can also wade, it's not going to be good. So you do really have to look for riffle drops and that sort of thing, number one. And once you have that, you can go in and you can be confident that all the riffle drops have fish. There's no question of that. The fish, as you mentioned earlier, do move around a little bit, but they're always there. And you'll notice in one spot, if you get a great hatch going on, you might see, in one riffle, you might see 8 or 20 big rainbows up eating little PMD drives, that sort of thing. And so there's a lot of big fish eating nymphs. So although I don't want to paint false expectations about the dry fly fishing, because it's hit or miss here still. When it's hit, it's really good. But typically what you do is you go into one of these riffle drops and you fish an indicator and probably usually a couple nymphs. And often we'll fish a large, like a rubber legs, brown rubber legs on top, and some sort of a smaller mayfly nymph on the bottom. And usually the drop, depends on the water, is going to be 6 to 9 feet from the indicator down. And you just go in and you cast, and I think one of the keys that a lot of people miss is that they'll fish just like they would a smaller stream, which is not bad. They'll come to the riffle and make a nice upstream strip line in, and then let it go below them, and then try again. A real key to consistently catching fish is remembering these are big riffle drops, and it's at any given time, it's easy to get a 60, 70-foot drift if you are willing to feed out line. So I'll cast out, make my cast, do my mending, and start feeding line. And my average drift is 60 feet, 70 feet, and that covers a lot of fish. Because if you just fish close to yourself, you're going to get your fly's going to be in a prime level in the water for a short distance, and you'll catch fish. But if it's at that prime distance, with the indicator holding your flies in place for 60, 70 feet, it's going to go by a lot more fish. Yeah. And it's a real key. It may sound obvious, but in a lot of smaller streams, you don't do that, right? And in this big river, you need to. Mm-hmm. And people say, wow, 70 feet, you're never going to hook a fish. Actually, it's not very problematic at all with the quality of our new hooks that we have now. You see your indicator go down, you set. You do learn to set pretty aggressively and quickly, but still, a lot of times those chemically sharpened hooks, they'll give you a minute. They'll give you a second. They'll kind of catch in a fish's mouth just because they're so sharp, and allow you to pick up enough line at 70 feet. I mean, I probably hook at 70 feet, I probably hook 50% of the fish that take my fly. That's pretty good. You know, if it's at 30 feet, I probably hook 75%. But still, it's an important thing to remember. And so it's a big river, and so you want to recall that. And
what are the
seasonally, go ahead.
So on the riffle drop, so that's basically just a riffle coming down and then dropping into a pool below it, and then you're fishing the slot, or you're fishing the slot down through the pool. Or,
exactly. And remember, it's on a large scale. So these riffles might be 50 yards wide and 100 yards long. So it's a big piece of water, and you probably won't. In most places, you can't fish all of it. You can't wade to all of it, but you can fish a good amount of it. And using the long downstream feeding technique allows you to cover more than you could, if you just fish close to yourself.
Gotcha. So. Okay. And then as far as depth, when you're getting down, are the pools? I mean, there must be a lot of variation, but how are you setting up typically your length of your, from, and what type of indicator are you using typically on that? Maybe you can just talk a little about that setup you use and how you get to the right depth.
Well, I'm kind of an outlier. I still love yarn.
Oh yeah.
So I use yarn indicators. I love the way that they're not nervous on top of the water like some of the little, plastic floats are and stuff like that. They anchor extremely well, very sensitive. You get a little bit of a fish on there, you'll see everything. You can react very quickly. Mm-hmm. The downside to yarn is that it takes longer to make a little indicator. It's sometimes, depending on what you use, it's more difficult to easily adjust the depth. So because I love yarn, to be honest with you, and this is going to sound a little archaic, but I don't adjust depths. You're right. Mm-hmm. There is places where it will pay to do that, but normally in most of the riffles out here, I'm going to set my indicator at about 7-8 feet from my indicator to my lowest fly. Mm-hmm. And it just doesn't seem to be a problem. I hook lots and lots of fish. I've messed around with changing depths, and it is a small improvement. But I think that if you're fishing from a boat, it's more important you do so, because from a boat you're fishing you might be fishing a 12-foot deep slot, then a 4-foot deep slot, and from a boat the guide can quickly and easily with a little pigment bobber quickly adjust that depth, and it's more important. From wading, you're fishing a pretty static amount of water. You're not really seeing such dramatic depth changes moment by moment. You're fishing a piece of water slowly and methodically, and if you need to change the depth at all, it may be once maybe. And so generally speaking, that 7-8 foot of drop works very, very well. And I really always tell people, no tapered leader below that indicator. Just a short tapered leader to the indicator, and all untapered tip below that, just because it increases your sink rate. The thinner monofilament sinks quicker. And another place I'm a little different than most guides, for a good reason, is that I don't like to do split shot. Mm-hmm. So I use a lot of tungsten beads, because I find that with 2 tungsten beaded nymphs, I don't need the split shot, and it really gives my flies a lot better motion in the water. It works better. However, when you're fishing out of a boat with a guide, you have to use it, because you're fishing some big heavy flows that you can't access from wading. And I mean, if it's 10, 12 feet deep and heavy, there's no tungsten bead nymphs in the world are going to get you down out there. Mm-hmm. So there's a place for it, and that place is used from a drift boat. But from guiding, from wading and riffles, people don't realize it, but you really don't need it. Yeah. Very seldomly will it improve your catch rate, and it's a lot. It's one more thing to take out of the system that makes it easier to fish. So
no, those are great. Those are great tips for sure. That makes it easy for somebody who is kind of new to it, but if you can just stay at 7 to 8 feet for a length, that is one less thing you have to worry about, and then get the split shot out of the way. And it sounds like you're talking a little bit, I mean, we've had a little bit of Euro nymphing topics on this before, but that's definitely a couple of those keys, the thin leader, the tungsten beads, things like that. It sounds like there's a little bit. And then also on the yarn, which obviously they don't use in Euro, but from a lot of the people I talk to, especially some of the guys that know their stuff, they love yarn for that reason. So is there a yarn indicator you can just buy, right out of the shop that's kind of ready to go? You guys have
there's a couple different things. There's one that's not actually yarn, but it's called the New Zealand nymph system, and they sell these bright colors of sheep's-wool, and I'll just use that, especially on a smaller indicator, because I can use these really bright little colors. It don't necessarily have to put floating on it, although I usually do. And again, I'll explain my system in a minute, but that can work. There is, we sell some just straight yarn. The yarn I use is macrame, braided macrame yarn, that people can make their own real easily out of. You don't see much anymore, though. The yarn indicator's kind of gone out of favor, and there's not as much out there. Yeah. And so, just real briefly, so people know that sometimes people think, I don't know how to make one. It's like, but it's pretty straightforward. You can go to a yarn shop, or you can buy it here, whatever. But you can get the braided macrame yarn, and you need a little comb, like a mustache comb. You can cut a piece off, you comb it out, so it's not braided anymore. It's just like the fibers are, separate from each other. And I'll usually use two colors. I'll get a yellow and an orange, because in different glare situations, one will be better than the other. And you can even put a little black in there for sheet glare. Sometimes that works. And then I'll comb that yarn out till I get a pretty good little bunch. I'll actually just use a clinch knot to tie that into the end of my heavy tapered leader. Maybe use a 7.5 foot 0X leader, and just tie it like you're tying a fly on, basically, with no eye. Clinch knot that to the end of my tapered leader, and then clip it so that I've got, maybe a total length of 2 inches of yarn, 3 inches for a real big indicator, but usually 2 inches total length. And then to that, I'll put my ink or dry fly dressing, paste dressing onto that, and so it floats just really, really well. And then for the business end, from there on down, I take usually I use 4X on the river out here, sometimes 5X for dries, but 4X is kind of the go-to. Also, I'll put 4X tippet, and I'll again clinch knot that 7/8 foot clinch knot of that mono to the tapered leader above the yarn. And then when you tighten the clinch knot, then I just slide it down to the knot, to the yarn. And of course, the yarn keeps it from going anywhere. And so at that point, you've got kind of a right angle system, because the way the tippet attaches, it kind of is a nice right angle straight below the yarn. And then I go below that, and because I don't use split shot, it's pretty easy. I usually go down about 6 feet and put my first fly, which 50% of the time is the number 6 brown rubber legs, patch rubber legs. And then from there down another 2 feet down to my smaller nymph. And my first go-to nymph out here usually is one of my own. It's a little epoxy back, or it's a beadhead epoxy back I'll get a PMD nymph. Oh, okay. Epoxy back PMD in a size 18. And that thing has been such a money fly over the years. So that's, probably 50% of the time, those are the two flies I use out here.
Not the Psycho Prince.
No, I use the Psycho Prince a little on the river, but not as much as you'd think. Yeah. Because it's become such a mayfly dominant kind of a situation out here, I use a lot of different mayfly nymphs. They could be anywhere from a number 20 blue and olive all the way up to a number 12 green drake. But most of the time, I'm using 16s and 18s. Okay. Because that's there's more betas and PMDs than anything else. And so, especially in the last 4 or 5 years, these fish have really locked on the PMDs as the PMD population has exploded. And so it's become kind of, like a lot of famous rivers, that's the case. And it's kind of evolved into that here. So the big stonefly nymph, of course, has a lot of weight. It keeps my fly breaks down, and the small tungsten mayfly, whatever you want to use, it gets down real quick too.
What percentage of, when you got that little setup, what percentage are taking your main big fly versus the other one?
Across the board, I get probably 80%, 75-80% on the small fly. Yeah. In the spring, when the fish are seeing more of the big salmon fly nymphs, that kicks up to maybe 40% on the big fly. Gotcha. So it does more in the spring, but the rest of the year, you'll get the occasional fish on it, but it's important as an anchor.
Okay. So. And you mentioned the New Zealand nymph system and some flies. I'll put some links to all this stuff in the show notes so people can take a look at it. And,
okay, cool.
And you also mentioned maps online on your website. If somebody wasn't able to swing by the shop, do you guys have any resources online or any recommendations on where you might, I don't know if you can find some of those maps, or just, I guess just in general, are there other resources that you would recommend if somebody wasn't able to get a guide and wanted to fish the Sacramento?
Probably the best thing, I should know this, but I'm not 100% sure if we've got the maps online. I kind of don't think we do. Yeah. It's not that it's a secret. We just don't think we put them on there. And they're just hand-drawn maps. They're nothing fancy. But I'm sure if someone called in and said, "Hey, I'm going to be, I'm headed to I'm heading to Sacramento, and could you send me your map of of access points and stuff like that, that we could just probably just like fax it to them, that sort of thing. I know I've taken a picture and texted it to friends and stuff.
Yeah.
But I don't know if we've got it online or not, but we should if we don't.
It's pretty cool. I'm
but there's always a way.
Yeah, I'm actually online. I just clicked through to the lower Sacramento River report for April here, and it's got a little bit on the report. Yeah, 12,000 CFS or whatever, and then it's got some information on the setup, the rod setup, which I'm assuming is 6, or what is it, a 6? Do you guys like to do 6 weights down there?
Yeah, 6s is the money rod. 5s if you know you're going to do dry fly fishing, but 6 is the great nymph rod.
Okay, and do you get a little bit of wind down there, or what are the conditions typically like?
Typically maybe a breeze. It's not typically windy. I mean, we will get wind like any place, but usually it's just on the edge of a storm now and then. So no, it's not a particularly windy place. A lot of the guys will use a 9.5-foot 6 just because they feel like it'll help the clients lift on the fish quicker and easier. I prefer weighting. I still prefer a 9-footer, but it doesn't matter. But it's for the boats. It's easy. Yeah. If a guy can cast 15, 20 feet, get the fly out of the boat, he's going to catch fish.
Right.
Because the guy is going to do a lot of the work for him. So, but if a guy's a better angler, he's going to be able to catch more fish because he's going to be able to read the water. The guy's not going to have to move the boat around as much for him. He can cover more water effectively, and so, it's same as anywhere. The better angler is going to cook more fish, but people don't need to be afraid. People who have little to no fly fishing skills are going to hook up with some really beautiful big fish. Problem probably is going to be they're probably going to break them off, because they're not used to fighting big fish. But they're big fish in big water. And so, if you hook a fish in a heavy current, maybe a 21, 22-inch fish, and you're a novice, the guide's going to have to really work with you. And the guides are great. They'll teach you casting. They'll teach you everything during the day. It's a great learning experience. But maybe the first time or two, you probably learn the hard way because they're powerful fish. And with a heavy current, they're probably going to hurt you. Yeah. Most people want to clamp down and keep them from running and pop them off. And you do that once or twice, you realize, okay, that's not going to work. Yep. And then the guy will say, okay, just let the hands off. You've got a good reel. Let the drag do the work. Don't worry, I can follow them. And you'll start hooking and landing more fish. But the key being, you can be an absolute novice and catch beautiful big wild rainbows in the lower Sac.
This episode is sponsored by Deli Fresh Design, a company that makes sustainable fly fishing gear in the heart of Denver, Colorado. Deli Fresh blends old waders and recycled sailcloth with Cordura canvas to make rugged, river-tested gear such as fly wallets, sling packs, and my favorite, beer koozies. I had a great chat with Ross at Deli Fresh as I was blown away by his dedication to fly fishing and conservation. Here's a short clip of how Ross reduces waste with his personal actions and as a responsible company.
But as a company, I'm trying to reduce my impact by riding a bike or taking the bus or shared cars, stuff like that for commuting. And then, when I go fishing, I'll get in a car, but I try to go with other people. And so I think there's things that as consumers that we can do on a daily basis. My own mentality of doing those things on a daily basis, like driving or riding a bike, and then trying to see what materials I can use that reduce waste, or what I'm trying to do as a person and as a company.
Pretty good stuff, right? Let's support a great company doing business the right way. All of DFD's gear will help you spend more time casting and less time juggling your stuff. To see these great products, go follow them on Instagram, where you can see their latest designs. Head over to delifreshdesign.com and use the coupon code WFS20 to get 20% off your next order. That's Deli Fresh Design and the coupon code WFS20. I think you're good. So if somebody was going to roll down there, maybe grab a map, head up river, grab a just normal trout setup, and and then find a spot to fish. Yeah, it sounds like it's pretty straightforward. You get out there and you're nymphing down, and if some bugs come off, just like anywhere, you might try to match the hatch. But other than that, anything else we're missing here to help that person that maybe is kind of new to it and get into their first fish down there?
I think. Excuse me. I think the one thing we deal with a lot is people see how big a river is and they're immediately intimidated. They're afraid to wade. They don't know where to look. Where do I cast? And we just always tell people, again, look for the riffle drops and just have confidence that those fish are in there. And you just look for water that's broken, that's anywhere from 3 to 8 feet deep. And don't get intimidated by the size. Just cover the water thoroughly. And, I can spend, these are big runs, big riffles. I can spend hours on a single riffle, just covering it top to bottom, really covering it well. Sometimes maybe I'll go through first with an egg pattern and a small nymph, then come back with 2 nymphs. You can fish a piece of water for quite a long time if you want, and you're not hammering the fishing. You don't want to camp on a piece of water. You want to keep moving, but it's big. Yep. And so, I like to wear studded boots out here because it's a big river and it can be a little slippery. It's not ledge rocks for the most part, anything. It's mostly just, river cobble, but spiked, studs in the bottom of your boots will help you if you're afraid of the water a little bit because it's big. It'll help you a lot stick, and wading staff is good. Most of the time you're wading in pretty shallow water, fishing out into deeper water though. So if you're wading deeply, it's probably going to be pretty slow water that you're wading through to get to the better riffle water. Gotcha. So I never fish heavy, fast, deep water. I never wade that because that's where the fish are. Yep. So you don't have to worry about if you're out there to your belt in fast moving water, you're probably right in the middle of the fish. You're probably not where you want to be. Okay. So, yeah.
Okay. And are you typically working your way kind of from upstream downstream, or are you working your way up?
It's one of those unique situations where it's almost always down from up fishing down. Okay. Which in a normal trout stream, you don't want to do that. Right. But this river is so large that the fish don't really see you coming. Oh, yeah. They're spread out all over a large piece of water, and the downstream drift with a nymph just lends itself so well to doing that. Start at the top and just start fishing down long stream, downstream drifts. Now, if I see fish rising, a lot of times I'll still do down up, from upstream downstream. But there are times when I feel that I might spook a rising fish less if I come in from the side and then, cast across and up a little bit or across and down a little bit. Might not be as much of a steep downward angle as I would with a nymph.
Gotcha. Okay. And is there a little bit of it doesn't sound like there's a heck of a lot of pressure down there. Is that not a problem? I guess it's a big enough river. You can find a good, easy spot.
It's big, exactly. The size of the river for some people is a curse because they're intimidated by it, but it's also a blessing because it'd be hard to hurt this river. We've been fishing it, we put out 5 to 15 guides a day for decades, right? And the fishing now and the quality of the fish is better now than it ever has been. So it's such a big river and has such a great population of rainbows that you're not really gonna be able to hurt it too badly. And that's the cool thing about a bigger river. And so, and a lot of times the water you'll fish wading is not necessarily the same water the guys from boat will fish. They're out there in the big runs where you can't reach, doing very well out there. Oh, okay. You're in the shallow riffle drops where they don't really go in there very much. And, I've a lot of fisheries I've been on in my life because I fished the Rockies a lot in different places. You notice when fish are getting hurt, you get a lot of fish with red mouths and hook marks, and they start getting gaunt, and you realize, oh man, something's wrong here. These fish are getting overpressured. Never ever seen that on lower Sac, not even close. It's rare to catch a fish with a little red spot in his mouth where he's been hooked previously. So it tells you there's a ton of trout out there. That's cool. And the size of the water really protects them a lot. There's some water that's just too deep and heavy. You really can't fish it well. And so they always do have kind of a safe haven. We fish, depending on where the flows are, we fish different water. If you're a guide out here and, you're looking at flows that fluctuate over a period of time between 4,000 CFS and 20,000 CFS, the line, the line you're going to take in a drift boat going downstream is going to be radically different. Slow flows to high flows. Right. Fish move around to stay in the prime feeding zone. So from a guide standpoint, from a guy in a boat standpoint, crucial that those lines. If I've got a river that's, 40 yards across, 50 yards across, is like, where do I flow down? Right. And so that's one thing the guides, they earn their money if nothing else right there.
Yeah, where would you? I mean, if you take it and switch it to somebody maybe that has a little 10-foot pontoon boat and is going down there. I mean, is that a valid way to get into it and fish? I mean, do you see many guys with little pontoon boats fishing down there?
Not many, but a few, and it can very definitely be valid. The things that you look at are, number one, are they capable of it? Because it's a big river, potentially dangerous. Oh yeah. You don't want to get swept into a sweeper in one of those little boats. You're probably not going to survive. And there's a couple really big riffle drops, giant suck holes, just giant swirl outs that are. I've been caught in one of them with a drift boat once. It brought me right to the gunwales.
No kidding.
Kind of frightening. You don't realize what the power in that is up there. So we're very cautious about telling people to do that.
What was that like? Could you tell us like how that felt, like how close you were and how you got out of it from dumping the boat?
It was terrifying. I mean, it was basically, and I'm pretty good at the oar. I mean, I know what I'm doing, but as we go from the Bonneview exit, which is just south of, I could walk there and just, in 10 minutes, just south of the shop, there's a boat ramp, and you can put into that Bonneview access and float down to Anderson. That's a classic float, full day float. But when you put your boat in there at the boat ramp, you go downstream and take a hard right, and then as you go down that next straightaway on the right-hand side towards the bottom, before the next left, there's this giant eddy, and that's where I got caught. And 9 times out of 10, or 98 times out of 100, you can row right through it. It's impressive. You don't want to row through it, but if you knew what you're doing, you could. And so I got a little bit careless. I mean, it's like, I've been through it a million times. I said, I'll just bring these people through this big. I mean, I'm not guided, but I just had some friends with me, so we went down and rowing through that. We just caught it at the wrong moment, and so anybody that with any sense is going to see that giant big eddy over there and say, "Well, stay away from that. Just go to the left side of the stream. Just don't go through it." Right? And so, but if you don't know what you're doing, you think, "Oh, it's just more big water." That's a problem, because once in a great while, if you get caught at the wrong moment in that suckle where you get the wrong spot at the right time, tremendous downward suction, like going down a drain. And it was terrifying. I got in there and it was like we kind of slowed down, and I just noticed the boat's getting pulled down and getting deeper and deeper and deeper. And then I started really laying on the oars really heavy, and I wasn't really being very successful. As hard as I rowed, we were still getting sucked down, and it was just basically lucky. It just spit me out. Wow. I didn't really know what was going to happen, but it's at one point all of a sudden, boom, we popped out of it and just went on down. But that was terrifying, but it was a great reminder of the strength of this river. It's big. And so, even a drift boat can conceivably get hurt out here. So if you're going down in a pontoon boat, you better know what you're doing, and you better stay away from any bad stuff, and basically the worst suckles in the river are right above Bonneview. They're at the if you go upstream, at the end of the big straightaway at the top of the bridge, there is one of those big giant eddy things, and then the one I just described is downstream. So within about a quarter mile up, a quarter mile down, that's the most dangerous water in the river for the most part, in this upper river. Gotcha. So other than that, though, there's sweepers. You don't want to get caught, you don't want to get sucked into a sweeper, because that will capsize you, and that's not bad, but that's not good. But so long-winded way of saying that if you're really good at a little pontoon boat, you know what you're doing in big, heavy moving water, sure, you can do it. But be very cautious. We recommend against it.
Gotcha.
Usually.
Who owns the most of that property? Is that like public BOM land, or generally is it all public?
It's not all public. A lot of it's privately owned by private homes. Okay. A lot of it's just private homes, but there is some pretty good swaths of public access too. Up again, mostly in Redding. As you go down, like there's from Anderson down, a lot of roads leave the river, so it's hard to have any place where the road hits the river where you can access it.
Okay.
Up in Redding, there's roads because there's a lot of people.
But if you have a boat, you can just hop in and float and fish wherever you want.
Exactly. There's a number of different really good drifts from basically from Redding to Red Bluff. It's just several drifts in there you can take.
Okay.
And so it's
if you were so if you're going down again, it seems like this huge river. I mean, a lot of times in some of the bigger rivers, you say fish. You don't have to fish further than 30 feet off the bank, and and that's a good way to separate. Is that the way this river is, or are you fishing a good chunk of the river? I mean, I'm just trying to narrow it down. If somebody finding those little riffle drops,
it's going to change a lot. There's no easy answer. The experience is huge, but having said that, the most obvious thing is you're looking for seams. So there's going to be various seams across all this big wide river, but generally speaking, if you can find one where you think the river's probably going to be, or can see it, is going to be 6 to 8 feet deep, and you've got a pretty good seam where you don't have a situation where 12 inches one way it's too fast and you can't get a good drift, 12 inches the other way it's too slow and you can't get a good drift. I mean, if you have a wide seam, maybe a 10-foot wide swath of the river that's all in that perfect, not too slow, not too fast flow, that's going to be something to really look for. There's always going to be places, most of the river, that there's water that's too heavy and too deep.
Okay.
It's usually in the middle. Not always, but
Gotcha.
but a lot of that water out there, you can't really effectively fish it.
Yep.
And a lot of it's towards the shore. It gets too slow, and maybe too shallow. So there's going to be some water that's good. And with the advantage of the drift boat is that a lot of the river that's no good for wading. It's too deep to wade. There's no riffle drop, no real delineation of good holding water. You can fish all that easily from a boat. And of course, boats, you're going down fast. The guides don't stop. They just keep fishing all day. And so even if I have 15 boats going down, that's not that much pressure on the river. It's because they're constantly moving. They're not stopping and hammering one spot over and over and over again. Or very seldom will. It'd have to be a pretty desperate day for them to do that, because the fish are spread out everywhere. So yeah, if you look for that seam, and the wider the seam, the better. That's always going to be kind of a money spot.
Okay.
It's a simplification, but it gives you an idea.
Yeah, no, that's good. That's good. I think we're doing a good job here. So, and I want to jump in a little bit on the fly tying. I know you've got some patterns out there that, are pretty popular patterns. And I did hear you mention something about, it's pretty interesting how you talked about your strategy for paring down, your flies, starting out with something that's kind of bigger and bulky. Can you talk a little bit, I don't know, and also maybe, I'm not sure if you have some fly tying tips. I always like to hear if there's tips. It's not always an easy thing to throw out there, but I think that paring them down is a good tip. Maybe you could talk about that, and then if you have any other tips for somebody who maybe struggles a little bit with tying.
Well, yeah, I love tying. I really enjoy the mystery of it, not ever knowing for sure what's going to work. I mean, what might look good to us might be useless in the water, and what might look horrible to us that just turns the fish on. You never know, and so I never production tie anymore. That's like slow death to me. I don't want to. My idea of sitting down on a vise and turning out 4,000 flies. I don't want to do that.
Did you production tie for a long time?
I did for years. For years, I did production tying and on as a sideline, to make extra money. And it was great. It was a great. I mean, I was so happy that I had that ability to make extra money doing that. But at some point, you just burn out. At least I did. Yeah. And it's like I never want to do that. But I had the challenge of imitating, of coming up with new patterns is still strong. I love doing that. And I think the key to that, probably for me, is what do the fish see? That's what the bottom line is, that there's something that engenders the confidence of a fish to take some flies better than others for some reason. What is that? What are they seeing that tells them, okay, that's safe? To some extent, it's a fish with a brain the size of a pea, and they're eating sticks and rocks all day long. So, it's not a perfect science, but there are definitely flies that seem to work better than others, and like my missing link dry fly came up with probably 8 years or so ago, and that thing's been just crazy effective. And to look at it, it's not the most impressive looking fly. It's like it's kind of a frail looking little thing. Doesn't really look like much, but you fish it, and it's incredibly productive for the most difficult fish and of course easy fish. And so you can't always rely on what the bins are most full of at the fly shop, what most flies look like. You got to get in the fish's head a little bit and say, what is the fish seeing, and how can I most accurately imitate that? And of course, fish see differently than us. They see colors different. So I think that we're a little bit lost when we say, okay, I've got to perfectly match this olive hue to this blue and olive, or else, it's not going to work. And that's probably not the most important thing. Yeah. Can't hurt, right? Use every trigger you can get. But I think that if you know why it is the fish is eating a certain life stage of an insect, what it is that's triggering that feed. Is it the trapped air bubbles in the shuck? Is it the wings blowing out of the shuck? Is it, what is it? What is it that excites the fish? That is what you can incorporate into a fly. And you mentioned the kind of reductive process of tying that I do sometimes, and that is when you're like a fly innovator, like what I'd like to do. You start with an open slate, right? You don't say, okay, I'm going to do this and this and this. I'm going to stick to what everyone else does because we know that works. I'm going to try to do something outside of the box. And usually I'm the kind of guy that commercial tyers hate, because I'm going to start with a lot of potential triggering features, meaning a lot of my flies have a lot of steps, which is not much fun to tie. For me, because I don't have to do it anymore, I don't care. I'm looking for what's going to work the best. And so very often I'll start with a fly and say, just off the top of my head, maybe I have 12 steps built into a fly, 12 different unique steps. And then I'll go out. I get to where it looks good to me. So, okay, this is what I had in my head. This is the reason I designed it this way. Everything in this fly has a purpose in my mind. That's what I like. And I'll go out and fish it. And if it fishes really well, it's like, great, it works well. But then I'll take a step out. I'll say, well, maybe I'll take this rib off, or I'll take this little piece of the thorax out. I'll take whatever. I'll take something out of it. And does it still fish? And if it still fishes great, I'll take another one out. And very often, it's surprising, or not surprising to a lot of people, that maybe that fly fishes just as well with 7 steps as it does with 12. And so, I like all those steps, but I found I can't get too married to them. I have to really be realistic. What is it? And in that process, I've discovered some interesting things about what it is the fish like. It's not always what people think. A lot of times, really goofy looking things are extremely productive. I mean, look at beadheads. Yeah. When beadheads first came out, I said, that's ridiculous. Right. No fish is going to eat that. That'll never last. And now, 20 years later, it's the biggest thing in fishing. Right. And so people looked at it like, it's stupid. A gold bead? Come on, that's dumb. It doesn't look like anything I've ever seen. The fish aren't going to like it.
Do you ever use a non-bead much for nymphs?
I would like to say that I still use them a lot, but the truth is I don't use them a lot. Mm-hmm. There are times when they're better, maybe in shallow or slow water, maybe where fish are pressured with bead heads. Yeah. There are times when it's a better fly, but I found myself slipping into that beadhead mindset and being so successful with it that I just there's times I think maybe I should try one without, and then I don't. Yeah. And I'm successful, so it perpetuates itself.
That's it.
But I do see on occasion that it's better without.
Okay. So. And so I'm just looking at the missing link here, and I'll put a link in the show notes for somebody, for folks out there to take a look. But I mean, it looks a little like an elk hair caddis, definitely a different slant on it. Can you describe, maybe how many steps are involved in the missing link and the process that went into that? And then how it is different from because most people probably know what an elk hair looks like.
Yeah, exactly. Absolutely. Yeah. So when I went about to tie it, what I was doing, I was fishing the lower sac, and the lower sac in the summer has these fantastic caddis. It's usually not hatches in it. It can be, but a lot of times it's egg-laying caddis. And as it gets darker, it gets more and more caddis sit on the water to lay their eggs, and they die. And so very often, real late in the evening, you've got a majority of fish up just in a feeding frenzy, just gulping these dead caddis like crazy. So I was like, that's what I want to imitate. I for 30 years, I hadn't been consistent. One night as a hero, I'd catch 8 big fish. Next night, 0. Same fly, seeming everything's the same. And so I was really I was up against this nut. I was trying to get past this. And so I think, okay, I'm just going to try to imitate a dead or dying caddis. And so to try to really capitalize on this amazing fishing situation. And so I thought, what do those caddis look like? I caught them, get a net, go out there and catch them and look at them. And that's a useful thing when you're tired. And I'd see that they're like very desiccated. A lot of them were kind of shriveled up. They're dying, they'd spent themselves. And a lot of them would have, little hairs and stuff on the abdomen. So there'd be a little air bubble sometimes trapped on there, looked a little bit of flash. But for the most part, they were just messy little used up pieces of garbage, but yet the fish were on them because it's such an easy food source. Not a strong food source, but there was a lot of them. And so I sat down at the vise and I thought, okay, well, I want that kind of thin, desiccated looking abdomen with a little bit of flash for air bubbles. So I put a flash through rib over a thread body to keep it real thin. And I realized, well, the first fish is going to chomp right through that flash through rib and ruin the fly. So I put Softex over the abdomen so it wouldn't, that wouldn't happen. And you could use loon. I usually use loon UV like flow. The UV stuff works great. Doesn't smell and it works well. So, but anyway, I wanted a covering. I wanted a little bit of a sense of depth to the body. I didn't want it I wanted to look a little translucent like a real bug's body, but I wanted it thin and like not much. And so I figured, okay, there's a dead caddis body. And I come forward and I thought, one of the big features of this fly is going to be I want down wings on it. Not the traditional delta wing. A lot of guys will tie a dead caddis with delta wings, and that works fine. And this is close to delta wings, but basically I like Zelon.
What is the delta wing?
Delta wings are kind of like at a 45 angle out from the body, and typically guys would use like hen wings, stuff like that, like hen spinner wings. Very much like an old hen spinner mayfly pattern might be. Or they might use different things for the wings, but they kind of have them down wings. But I don't know, sometimes use deer hair. But a lot of times I've used those, and again, I really ran across very inconsistent success rate. So I wanted to use Zelon wings because I've always found Zelon is something about it. It's one of those magic things that engenders confidence in the fish. So I was going to do Zelon down wings, not unlike a mayfly spinner, except I was going to have them more tilted towards the back, not straight out the side at right angles to the hook shank. And so I did that, and then there's I put a little dubbing ball at the end of the abdomen, right where I put the wings, Zelon wings ahead of that, because I found that if you just tied Zelon wings on and didn't have a little spreader, something to keep the wings apart, they would just fold in and they look like the hook shank.
Oh, yeah.
They just look like a little nothing.
Yeah.
So putting a little dubbing ball in there kept the wings out to the sides a little bit, and it kept them separate so the fish could see, oh, there's something different there. There's down wings, like a dead caddis. But that fly would be absolutely invisible on the water. An angler could never see that. So I basically took Ralph Cutter's design of an elk hair wing with a parachute hackle, and we're all borrowing from each other. I mean, there's not very much new, but I'd always admired that fly because Ralph's a great tire, and that fly had caught me a lot of fish. So I borrowed that design with the elk wing and then a parachute hackle and put that in front. I did one thing I did was that the front of the elk hair, I left the front ends as it go over the hook eye kind of a little bit long and blunt. And then when you wrap the hackle, those blunt ends and the back wing goes over the top, the elk hair tips, they all kind of fold. They almost end up going straight up in the air.
Exactly.
And at first I thought that's kind of weird, but I always thought I'd be able to see it. I've come to realize that actually is a great silhouette for an upwind.
Oh yeah.
And a slight tangent, a slight rabbit trail. What I found is that I end up more fish take the missing link as a mayfly than do for caddis. But anyway, so that wing silhouette ended up turning, again, a mistake, but it turned out perfect. And so anyway, so that's basically it. It's a relatively simple.
That's cool.
Not much to it. It doesn't draw your eyes when you look in a fly bin. And so I went out and brought that fly out, and I never changed it because the results were dramatic. When the first night we went out, and I hooked every single fish I cast to, every one.
Wow.
And it was like, wow. And I thought, well, maybe that was just one of those good nights, right? I've had those before. The next night I went out, same thing, every fish.
Yeah.
This went on for months. It's like, this is crazy. But I think the biggest thing was when I brought it to the Rockies. I go to the Rockies every year, fish Montana every year. And I went out and fished the fire hole one day, and there was a bunch of these highly selective little 12-inch fish. I mean, tough. These were like Henry's fork fish, even though they're only 10 or 12 inches. And they were eating beta snips and beta strides. And I put on like a size 16, one of these missing links, because the fish were kicking my butt. And everything I was using that was a 22, which accurately imitated what they were eating, I was just getting refusals. But I noticed there were some white millers, some caddis flying around. So I said, well, I'll put on my missing link, size 16. It's like 4 times bigger than the actual mayfly. I put it out there and proceeded to catch like every fish out of these ponds.
No kidding.
It's like, what in the world? These fish are eating 22s, and they take this 16 dry like it was their last meal.
Yep.
So I started realizing there's something different here. What I designed it for, it was good for, but it's a way bigger picture. And so I started realizing that the fish took it for a mayfly. When I started looking at it with those different eyes, I realized, oh, that abdomen that I designed to be a thin, desiccated cat's abdomen, these fish are eating that as a shuck. There's no tail on the fly, and so they're eating that as a mayfly shuck. And it makes sense because you've got this tightly ribbed, dark body ribbed with a flash, and so it looks exactly like a mayfly shuck that's so segmented, and it looks perfect for that. I never thought of that until afterwards, and then the rest, the way that the downwings are, well, that could be an emerging mayfly, that because they have downwings like that when they emerge a lot of times momentarily. That could be a spinner. That could be a lot of stages of the mayfly. And then the upwing with the up, silhouette looks like a freshly emerged mayfly or caddis as far as that goes.
Wow.
And so it just covers so many bases, as it turns out. I wasn't smart enough to design it that way, but I was lucky enough that I just came up with that design, and it works so well for everything.
That's cool.
And I always tell people it's literally I use that dry fly. And any dry fly situations outside of really big flies, I use that easily 80% of the time, easily, for anything, any mayfly, caddis, midge, terrestrial, anything. It's just crazy effective. And so people know me for my nymphs. I've been doing nymphs for years, and I love tying nymphs, and I've had a lot of great ones, but I think this is probably, even though it was just a fluke, it was probably the most dramatic thing I've probably ever come up with. And again, I can't take much credit. I mean, it didn't end up being good for what I designed it to be, but that just opens up, we have to remember this mystery of this. There's a lot of things we don't see with our eyes that the fish sees. And with a missing link, they take that thing with such endless positiveness. It's like they just come up and eat it. They don't pause, even hardfish. And so it tells me there's something in there. I may not even understand what it is yet,
right,
but there's something in that design that they feel comfortable with. It looks right, and they eat it.
And what is the naming on the missing link? What is the missing link?
Well, yeah, that I didn't name it that immediately because I had some stupid name for it first, just my own working name, like Dead Caddis or something like that. I can't remember exactly what it was, but it was just a working name. And then when I started realizing, hey, wait a second, this is filling a lot of those niches that we're not necessarily filling with the fly designs. That's where the name came up. It was like it's a little bit of that, a little bit of that. It's that missing link between all the standard patterns now that are used that are effective, and it's proven it's effective in all these different realms of fishing. And so it's kind of like a missing link pattern, something that attaches the known to the unknown.
Gotcha. Okay, cool. Well, that gives you a good example, or gives me a good example of the process and a fly that works really well. I was wondering if we could jump into, I guess, a little bit more of a kind of a rapid fire round here to kind of wrap things up. I always start with a little bit on, and you've talked about maybe your top 2 flies, but I like to go into kind of your top 2 flies, top 2 tips, and top 2 resources. And we're talking about the Sacremento, the lower Sac, and trout and rainbow. So do you have any other flies you would recommend, or have you already mentioned your go-to flies?
Yeah, I mean, and it might be worthwhile to pick a mountain stream too, because it's very different. But yeah, I mean, most of the time on the lower Sac, when I'm nymphing, an awful lot of time it's rubber legs and the puck spec PMD an awful lot of time. Now I will, if I get out there and there's a Baetis hatch or something like that, I'll go down to a little 20 Baetis nymph or whatever. You have to be careful because they're big fish and heavy flows. Those better be tied on a pretty heavy little hook, even though they're dries, or nymphs, either way, because 20-inch fish, heavy flows, number 20, that's a small hook.
Right.
So you have to be a little careful. But generally speaking, even on the lower Sac, I tend towards smaller rather than the larger. I tend to use, other than the big fly, I tend to use a lot of 18s. And I see a lot of people using 14s and 16s, and that's good. They work. There's certainly a place for them. And honestly, out of a boat, it makes a lot of sense because an 18 out of a boat, you're going to open up a lot of hooks. But from a weighting standpoint, it's like a smaller stream. You're letting the fish run, you bring them in, and you don't have a tremendous amount of current involved there because you're in a riffle drop somewhere, and they might go out in a heavy current, but then they'll quickly come back into the softer water as you fight them. So you can get away with smaller flies, and I would add that to the list, the missing link for the dries. I use virtually 100% for any hatch that comes up out here, and that's my short list.
Gotcha.
There's a lot. My box is full of flies, and I use them all at one point or another. But if someone had to go out there and just use 2 flies, for nymphs, that would be the 2 I'd tell them to do. And there's something better, but across the board, across the season, those are going to be consistent.
Gotcha. Okay, and then what about your top 2 tips? You could just talk maybe generally fly fishing, or if you wanted to get specifically on nymphing. Do you have a couple of tips that come to mind? Somebody who's out there for the first time.
First time, yeah. I would say that you're probably, if you're out there for the first time, you don't have any confidence, right? You're going to be saying, I don't know what I'm doing this right. I don't know what. So it's going to really behoove you to understand in any given piece of water where the fish lives. That's huge because once you get a little bit of confidence in that, once you know, okay, this is where the fish is going to live. Say I'm on a McCloud or a smaller river, and they've got a heavy rapids, flattens out into a nice riffle, then goes into a pool, and then goes into a shallow tail out, and then goes into the heavy rapids. Okay, you look at it and say, okay, where are the fish going to be? If I'm a new guy, it all looks the same. They could be anywhere, And so what you learn is that where the fish is going to be is going to depend on two things: where the food is going to be the best, and where it's going to be brought to him the easiest, and where he's going to have the most cover from ospreys and predators, stuff like that. So always, when you're given a given piece of water, and it's a real generalization, but if I go into that situation in McLeod or the Upper Sac, something like that, I look at that riffle, because most of the time those riffles are going to be pretty deep. Remember, they came out of a heavy, deep, kind of a raging rapid, which is too heavy to fish. And it's the interim between that and the slow pool, where the slow pool can be good, but again, the fish can be kind of feel a little bit,
spooky.
the osprey can see them. They might be easier for an otter to catch them in that kind of water. But in the riffle, they've got broken water overhead, so the osprey can't see them nearly as well. It's all broken. They've got a conveyor belt of food coming out of the heavy water into the relatively heavy water. That's just constant food, and usually the biggest fish is going to be at the top of that chow line because he wants the first shot at it, and he's going to be in the most prime spot. And then you've got some depth usually in that riffle. So again, it just makes them feel less conspicuous, less available to predators, and so very often that's going to be it. But so you just take one simplistic rule: go to the heavy riffle at the top of a run. There's always going to be fish in there, no matter what. It's going to be there. There are exceptions. I mean, if you get a big hatch, sometimes those fish in the riffle might drop back in the pool, might drop back in the tail out, and you're going to see it then because you'll see them rising most of the time. And so that's a little more obvious. But, knowing where the fish are, it's going to be huge because it's true that 90% of the water, 10% of the water has 9% of the fish. And so if you can work on that confidence factor, that's a big, big deal.
Okay. And I was going to say I was just thinking as far as resources, if you had, we talked a little bit about some different resources, but do you have maybe a favorite book, magazine, or, video or something out there that you kind of as a resource? I mean, obviously you've been doing this, you're your own resource, but anything along the way, or maybe you can even speak to mentors, people that have helped you kind of get to where you are.
Well, yeah, absolutely. I mean, mentors are great. If you can find somebody to walk you through it, that's the best case scenario, because a lot of times most mentors are learning too as they go along. They may know a lot, and so it's a double learning process. They'll actually teach themselves as they're teaching other people. So that's a win-win. I love mentoring. It's the best. Yeah. Outside of that, you can hire a guide for a day. And if you do that though, if we have a lot of people take our guides, that's all they do. They're busy schedules. They don't have a lot of time off. They just want to come up and maximize the number of chances they're going to have to catch nice fish. And that's totally legit. That's great. And for them, just getting a guide every time is perfect. Everybody, it's a win-win. Sure. If your mindset, though, is that you don't have a ton of money, but you want to take kind of a magnum step forward in your understanding of how to be successful in this game, even just a one-time guide can be very, very useful. What you want to be careful of, though, is you want to be careful. You want to make sure that guy knows what you want. Because he's probably going to just assume you want to catch as many fish as you can. But if you tell him, no, that's good, I want to catch some fish, but I want to learn from what you know in your mind. I want to go to water that's going to be like water that I'm going to fish on my own in the future. So maybe it's not the lower Sac. Maybe it's a mountain stream or whatever
Sure.
you're going to. Maybe it's a steelhead river, whatever. But when you take that guide, make use of them. I mean, assuming you're going to be doing most of it on your own from that point on, really ask him a ton of questions. Just drill him. He doesn't care. It's fine. He's paid either way. And the really useful part of that guy, I think, more than just catching fish, is what's in his head. You alluded to it. It's like people who start, they don't have anything in their head. They don't know. No. But a person that's been at it a long time has got a wealth of information in there. And most of us are more than happy to pass it on. It's like, sure, I mean, it's fine. I mean, and so understanding where you're going to be fishing the most in the future and really mining that guide for that information can be very useful. Great.
Did you have along all the years? I mean, you must have had in the shop there along the way some people that helped you. Is there a name of one person that was kind of a bigger than life sort of person? Or I'm not even sure who's running the shop or who's owned the shop over the years or how that's all worked. But is there somebody that sticks out as a big influence?
Yeah, there was two owners to start with, and about 10 years in, one of the owners bought the other out. So it's for the last 30 years, so it's been one owner. But I think that if I looked at mentors, probably came before the shop. There was a guy when I lived in Chico by the name of Denton Hill, and Denton's gone now. But Denton was one of these large-life guys back then when fly fishing was in its infancy, Den was traveling all over the world fishing crazy jungle fishing and doing all this crazy stuff, some of which is still considered edgy, sketchy stuff.
Yep.
He was doing when there was no infrastructure or very little. And so Den, for whatever reason, kind of took me under his wing, and I just looked up and was like, wow, this guy fishes all over the world. I mean, I'm excited to fish Chico Creek for smallmouth bass, you know, and he would show me flies. He just showed confidence, you know, like he wanted me to succeed. And so it wasn't like we spent a lot of time together, but he was, like you said, one of those larger than life kind of figures. And he would just encourage me and say, you know, well, I fish this local creek too. This is what I use, you know, and try this, or, and he encouraged my fly time. Back then he said, man, Mike, you've got an knack for this. I don't tie. My flies are rough, you know, and so that encouragement is really a cool thing. And so he was, you know, one of the mentors that definitely stands out in my mind. Is like, that guy, I was a, you know, a 14-year-old nothing, just some kid, you know, and he was like the leading edge in fly fishing, you know, the international fishing back, which was almost non-existent even back then. And so, I'm huge on mentors in any part of life, but that was good.
You've done a lot of that now too, right? You've traveled around kind of Argentina, around the world, and hit some spots.
Do a lot.
What would you tell somebody who is sitting there and maybe listen to this, but they've, you know, mostly only been trout fishing and kind of think like maybe they're not, you know, too interested in the saltwater stuff or getting out? You know, what would you tell somebody like that as far as, you know, now that you've traveled? And have you done some saltwater fishing?
Oh, yeah, tons. Yeah. I've fished everywhere. Over the years, I've been doing it a long time. So one of the first questions I always have for them is, what is it you want out of this trip? Because that's the key, right? Yeah. You know, I've got a lot of guys that just want to catch the biggest trout of their life, or the biggest bonefish of their life, or whatever it is. And that's their mindset. And other guys want to catch, I don't care, I don't need big fish, I just want to catch a bunch. I want to have fun every day, catch 30 fish, or whatever it is, you know. So really ask them what they want. And often in that process, I come to realize they don't really know what they want. Like a guy has heard about Alaska all his life, and I want to go to Alaska before I die. I want to experience this amazing country and do it. And so he calls me up and I say, great, all right, then we start talking. It's like, there's a lot of options. You know, what are you looking to catch? Salmon or trout or, you know, dolly varden? Or within that, do you want to catch trout on egg patterns or skated moss patterns, or do you want to catch king salmon or silver salmon? So there's all these questions that go into a trip like that, and most people have never thought about it. They don't know what to ask. And so that's kind of the fun part, is because you get in there and they think, oh man, really, I can catch a trout on a mouse pattern? That's amazing. And I want to go there, right? That's what's going to spin my wheels. And so that's the fun part. But I guess, you know, a lot of people, they don't need to take an international trip. They love their home water, and they're completely content there. Yep. But a lot of people are not. They love that, but there's this kind of unsettling sense. You're like, man, I miss it. I want to try something new and exciting. Totally. And at that point, it's just, you know, the best thing is to talk to someone who's done it all. Yeah. And so knows all the advantages, disadvantages, knows why you might like salt or might not like salt, why you maybe want to go to Alaska, or you might want to go to Kamchatka, you might want to go to South America. You know, there's so many different options that if this is a one-time trip or the first of many, they're expensive, and they're big trips. You know, they take a fair amount of time, and there's a lot involved. So you don't want to, even if you're going to do a lot, you think, in your life, you don't want to waste one. No. And so it's really valuable to talk to someone who has that wide scope of understanding and has done it all, knows why people like certain things, don't like other things, and knows what questions to ask you. So
what's your, as we wrap up here, I was just kind of curious, you know, I've talked to, you know, a bunch of, you know, now with over 75 episodes, people that have been in all ends of the fly fishing, you know, kind of world. Yep. Yeah. You've been doing it as long as probably some of the biggest ones I've talked to. I mean, what is as you look into, you know, the future here, what are your plans for, are you going to continue travel in the world? I mean, do you have any specific plans over the next, you know, as you think of towards, you know, retirement or whatever that looks like down the line?
Yeah, probably no retirement. I like the job too much, but
yeah.
But yeah, well, what we see, I mean, we have five guys here that just dedicated to selling travel, and we all travel a lot. You have to.
Yeah.
And
how much do you travel?
One of us.
How much do you travel per year or per season or per?
Usually 2 to 6 weeks a year.
Okay.
And that's you'll go to, maybe you'll take a 2-week trip and you'll see 4 lodges or 4 different places in the same geographical area, that sort of thing. That's most typical.
Gotcha.
And then we all have our favorites too. For example, I'm more of a trout guy. I love everything. I love permit, bonefish, tarpon. I love steelhead. I love everything.
Yeah.
But if you cut me open, trout come out, right? I just love trout.
Yeah.
And so, I could go wherever I want, but my specialty here is New Zealand, South America, Alaska, places where you find, trout. And so and some of the guys in here, they're saltwater. You cut them open, permit fall out,
That's
right.
And
so it just kind of depends on what you want. But personally, both personally and professionally, one of the realities of this job is you have to keep finding new cool places. Mm-hmm. And so, like recently, I just found this place in Lau. I helped start a little bit. A place in Alaska has amazing salmon fishing. It's on a peninsula, so it's a raw, rugged country. Nobody out there. And we worked with this guy who's an outfitter out there, been out there for years, and he just wanted to start this operation. So we just happened to get together and talk, and it's amazing. It's just incredible fishing. As you can get, as the king salmon runs in Alaska are going away, essentially, his fishing out there is as good as it has ever been anywhere. And just the country is so amazing. So places like that, it's really incumbent on us to continue to push the envelope, continue to find new cool places. And of course, it's fun for us. And for every amazing spot we find, we'll find 2 that are less than amazing. So you just have to do your due diligence. But for most of us here in the shop, we're excited about trying new stuff. And to be honest, so is our audience. The tried and true stuff will always stay full. There's always the places that have proven themselves for 20, 30 years. They're great. They couldn't be any better for what they are. And so they'll always stay full. It's not a problem to keep those places full and people happy. But there's always the contingent of people that want the next new cool stuff. And we're at the front of the line. We like that, right? So that's kind of, as I look ahead, as this world shrinks and it becomes less and less new options, what's that going to look like? Where are we going to find new stuff? And as we, fish crazier and crazier places in the world and find fish, it's exciting.
Yeah.
There'll still be new cool places when I'm dead and gone, and that's the good part of it. So
gotcha.
Yeah, that's people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I guess thinking, back to that kind of the initial part of that question, just on and I think of, Jeff Currier, who I had on, all the answers, because I've asked this question a few times about, what does it look like, kind of either life after fishing or just retirement sort of thing. And I asked that because I have people on this that are just starting out, right? And they're just trying to become a guide and want to get into the fly fishing, industry or however you call it. And I think it's good to hear people on the other end of the bench. And Jeff Currier, his answer was, he was talking about maybe buying a camper and traveling, just living out of that, right? And going down to Mexico during the time and then doing the fly fishing circuit. And, and so there's one way, right? There's one way to do that. Then you got to, I think, Oliver White,
And then for Jeff, for Jeff, that's retirement because he's such a crazy man. So
exactly.
And then Oliver.
Oliver, and he's got a different story where, I don't know exactly where he's going, but he's, got a lodge kind of thing he's working on. Just curious, what does it look like when you're in a fly shop? Do you pretty much, is it you're in the fly shop and that's kind of, traveling around? Is that kind of the end of the story, or do you see other things that come up? I guess, have you ever done any repping and that sort of stuff? Is that a different deal, right?
No, never have. I've had really good friends with reps, and it's a tough way to make a living. Yeah. You can make a good living, but it's not easy. And, I've raised 2 daughters now, and they're not out of the house and married and different things. Wow. And so I'm at a stage now where potentially I have more free time. I do a lot of mentoring in my personal life outside of fly fishing. So that's become a real passion for me, but cool. I still do. I love to mentor fly fishing too. Yeah. There's a lot of guys and girls especially young women that want to do it, but that maybe their brothers always got to go fishing and they never did. And the more I hang out with women that want to fly fish, the more I see that same passion I had that everybody has. And I love to encourage that because they come at it a little differently. Our guys tend to be a little more competitive, not necessarily, but on average, women maybe come into it looking at something a little different. And sometimes I think maybe they get it right earlier on, because a lot of times when you come up from a typical guy standpoint, as you get older and you start appreciating what this fly fishing thing is, what it brings to the table, what that space inside you that it creates. It's beautiful. You start realizing, I don't need to be competitive. I'm going to enjoy every moment of every day, no matter what happens, Yep. And I see a lot of women, they kind of get that from the first. And they just really enjoy it. And they like that. Same thing as we do. So they like to be the social part. We go out with friends and have a blast and fish together and tell stories and have a beer. And they love that. But they also love going out on their own and just being all by themselves and nobody out there and just learning. Kind of like I did as a kid. You learn by failure, right? And go out there and learning on their own. And maybe they take a guide once in a while and take a little, jump up in their learning curve and stuff. But there's something beautiful about that learning curve, learning on your own, that is pretty powerful. And it can't be duplicated with a guide. A guide is a great thing, and it can help a lot. But something about being an organic part of the learning process is powerful. And so anyway, I don't. I think I'll be here till I drop. But for me, mentoring has become a really big part of my life, whether it be fishing or otherwise. But that's what sustains me.
No, that's awesome.
For me, I don't have to.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah, no, that you totally, you see, you answered it there. That's the thing. So if we come back in whatever time they're online, we'll probably still find you in the shop, which is great. No, I appreciate
it. More than likely.
That's awesome. That's cool. Okay, well, Mike, that's about all I have for you. Just want a couple, just one wrap-up question here. In the next 6 to 12 months, anything you want to let us know you got coming up, or the shop, or you personally, or anything new coming up we can expect from you?
More just, we've got some from the shop per se. Again, I'm in the travel part of the department, but in the shop. But we've got some amazing new places. The place in Alaska I mentioned. There's some brand new saltwater destinations where we both opened and are getting ready to start representing, that are really unique, extremely exciting, relatively easy. So for those people who are looking at international travel, we've got some exciting destinations going out there, really good stuff. And then as far as local fishing, I love the local area. As I mentioned, besides the lower Sac, there's so many great waters, everything from tiny little mountain creeks that are full of beautiful little brookies and rainbows that never get touched. Nobody does that kind of fishing. You put a 7-foot 2-weight out there, it's amazing. It's a blast. Yep. And there's places like the Warners, that have great trout fishing that nobody goes, because it's a 2-hour drive from there. I don't have to go that far to catch good fish. But, and then there's rivers like this Upper Sac and McLeod and the Pit and these great blue ribbon streams that this year, it should be a great year because we had a big snowpack. And whereas the fishing may be a little tough in May, because there's going to be some high water, come June and even July into our hot summers, I think it's going to be a banner year for local fishing, especially once you get to late May and June. And it'll carry through the season. So there's just a lot of good stuff.
If you had to pick 1 month to fish, is there a best time?
For local?
Yeah, for the Sac.
I would say locally, on the lower Sac, I would probably pick, it's hard because it's all good all the time, but I would probably pick, maybe a spring date before the river comes up, maybe, March or something like that, when we've got hatches and everything's going, the water's low. On the mountain streams, the McLeods, the Pits, the Upper Sacs, I normally look at, it depends on the snowpack, but if a little higher snowpack like over this year, June is usually the golden month, because that's when you're going to have good water conditions, so the fish are going to be eating no matter what. But by June this year, we're going to have ideal water conditions, and that's still just a really great hatching time. It's when the mayflies, stones, caddis, everything's hatching then. So you have not only great nymphing, which you always have, but you have some really good dry action too.
Gotcha. Okay, perfect.
And some years that's May, but this year it's probably going to be June.
And you guys don't have as far as like a stone fly, you don't really have the salmon fly hatch down there, a big one, or do you have that?
Oh, we do.
Yeah.
Actually, we've actually got a really great salmon fly hatch on Hat Creek, a good one on the McLeod, pretty good one on Upper Sac. The lower Sac, it's here, you'll see it, but there's still not enough of them to provoke a giant response.
Yeah.
The fish see enough of them so that they eat the nymphs like 10 men, but they don't eat the dries as much because it's not thick. But some of our mountain trout streams have a really good population.
Oh, good. Okay. Well, so if they want to find you or the shop, just theflyshop.com is the best spot. Do you want any other links, or where they can find you? We want to share here.
Yeah, if they want to just drop me a quick note or have a question or something, again, they can get to me at mercer@theflyshop.com. But otherwise, if they just go to the normal fly shop site or whatever, anybody can just direct them to me. Or, but yeah, just theflyshop.com is our website and all the stuff that we do.
Okay,
that works great.
Perfect. All right, Mike. Well, just want to thank you for coming on. I appreciate. Definitely the show. I kind of had an idea where we were going from the start, and we kind of transferred. And I'm glad we jumped into your local waters because it sounds like you have some pretty amazing fishing right in the backyard. So
it's good.
Yeah, I just wanted to thank you for all your knowledge, and we'll look forward to keeping in touch with you.
Thanks, Dave. Appreciate the opportunity.
Okay, see ya.
Take care.
So there you go. If you want to find all the show notes with all the links we covered, just go to wetflyswing.com/Mike. If this show was helpful at all, if it was entertaining or educational, or otherwise you just hung on to the show, I'd love if you could share it with one other person. It is my goal to change the world. And even though I don't know exactly how I'm going to do that right now, I know that making connections with more people and getting the word out is going to be the secret sauce for this little movement. Let's change somebody's day, week, or month, or year by introducing them to Mike Mercer and the missing link. Thanks again for stopping by to check out the show today. I'm looking forward to catching up with you soon and hope to maybe see you online or on the river.
Thanks for listening to the Wet Fly Swing Fly Fishing Show. For notes and links from this episode, visit wetflyswing.com. And if you found this episode helpful, please subscribe and leave a review on iTunes.